Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're most pleased to welcome you to our program today, and it is titled New Safety Procedures at America's and even international airports in other countries. In order to carry out this very important discussion, we're so pleased to welcome to our program three individuals who certainly can do that. First of all, I welcome to the program Rhonda Sand. She is the president of Travel Management Incorporation, and her company, as I've said, schedules both groups and individuals around the world. Rhonda, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And also from her company, two other individuals that we're pleased to have here. First of all is Priscilla Reynolds. She is the project manager of the company. And Priscilla, welcome to the program. We look forward to this interview.
Thank you.
And third, we have Lindsay Prumers, who is also with the company, and she coordinates many of the international groups in their travel and also fundraising groups. Welcome to the program, Lindsay.
Thank you.
And as always, I'm so pleased to have regular panelist Janelle Burke, and she will commence the question today on some information and ideas about safety in flight at this time.
Many of our viewers travel, and they travel for business and they travel for pleasure. And so my first question is going to be one, is this a good time to travel? And let's start with you, Priscilla.
Well, actually right now is an excellent time to travel because a lot of the fares and stuff are down, and the Spokane Airport has just switched over to the federal regulators and from the contract people. So now it's one of the first airports in the country to do that. And they're getting it down to where their goal is to get people from curbside through security within 10 minutes. And I've traveled recently and have found that to be the case.
So they're really trying to improve the travel arrangements for people.
They really are, and in the past it was the contractors that was handling it, and now it's the federal government.
And Lindsay, can you add to that some reasons why people might want to travel now?
Yes, well, in the past there were around 100 to 115 screeners, and by the end of this year they hope to have increased that to 200. So I've just been there and I was most impressed because in addition to extra screeners that are now employed by the federal government, the employment process to hire these people are much more sophisticated than in the past. Now they are having to have background checks. The whole interview process is much lengthier. They're required to take tests, and previously they were minimum wage people because they were employed either by the airlines or by subcontractors, and now employed by the federal government. They are on paid salaries which are quite adequate. They have different benefits, and so now they are accountable for their jobs and they are expected to perform much lengthier process, and they should increase them to 200 like I said.
So that should help us get through that initial screening more quickly.
Yes.
I should add that when you speak to that, our program goes into 7 states and into Canada, so we're speaking of the Spokane International Airport, and that's where you visited, and similar kind of procedures are coming into place at other cities and other airports. My first question will be to Rhonda, the president of your organization. Rhonda, what kind of reaction are you getting? Or put it another way, what kind of inquiries are you getting from your customers about traveling in the last year, and after all of the terrible crimes that took place in New York and in Washington D.C. and Pennsylvania, and how are you addressing those before they fly? Some advice and tips on one, trying to have your customers to be relaxed, but secondly, what they should and should not do.
Well, interestingly, we've changed our insurance programs for all of our group travelers to encompass some of the changes with 911, and we actually make them very, very aware of the insurance programs now. As a matter of fact, a lot of our programs, we actually include insurance, not as an option, but just to also protect them, in case they don't think that they would potentially need it. What we found after 911 was we had wished so many more had purchased trip cancellation insurance for that type of an emergency. That's from a leisure and group side. from the corporate side, we're going in right now and we're revisiting with all of our corporate accounts, or have been over the past year, and helping them rewrite their travel policies, because the travel industry is in a constant state of change, and a lot of organizations, they only take a look at the policies that they ask their travelers to travel under maybe once when they write them, and then they don't look at it again for another 5 years. And Priscilla, do you want to add to that?
Well, usually the security issue is something that most travel policies in corporate travel, they didn't cover it at all. And it has now become very important. And some of the things that we're seeing that are being added to that, in fact, Rhonda and I just previewed a software program that I think corporate travelers will really find really interesting, because what it does for the corporate travel manager, he can tell where his travelers are at any given time. It's a program that resides on his desktop and links directly to the FAA website. So let's say he's got 10 people on the road. He can look in this program and it will show them, probably before the people even realize, if the flights have been rerouted or if there's been a cancellation or something like that, because it's updated by the FAA website. So at any given time, he can tell exactly what's happened. If there's a rerouting, he can make sure that those arrangements have been made. So before the person even gets on the ground, they're already taken care of. This came to be important because at 9/11, a lot of the travel managers, because of how people had been booking travel through the companies, they may have been using websites, they may have been using a variety of different places, they didn't know where everybody was at that time. And so trying to track everybody was very difficult. And so these are some of the changes that we've seen happening.
Again, so that we hope and pray that never ever happens again, but it is still helpful to have this process in place about, even when there's not an awful crime like that, still you need to know where your people are. When individuals travel and they're not with a particular group traveling, there are things that you cannot take on the trips that you used to you could take. There's things that will be looked at very carefully versus others. So let's go through some of those at this time. I don't know who wants to take this question, but whichever one of you want to. I've been traveling some speaking, touring around the country speaking, and I observed some passengers bring the wrong things and really help them up. So let's talk about the do's and don'ts.
Well, flammable objects such as lighters and matches you shouldn't take in your hand luggage. Should be something checked in. And anything that could be considered a weapon, like a knife, knitting needles, they're not too keen on. Anything that could be taken from that passenger and is used as a weapon is what you shouldn't have.
Even fingernail clips and those kind of things they look at questionable. I noticed in one lady they took away some fingernail clips that she was using to.
It depends on if they have a rounded point.
Okay.
They're all right. If they're pointed, that's what they're looking for. Also, if you have like pepper spray or mace, in the past, and I know a lot of people for security-wise have those on their keychains or something like that. Those you can have one canister of those in your checked luggage, but you cannot have them in carry-on.
Also, if you excuse me, if you have a round trip ticket versus a one-way ticket and when it was purchased and all that, address that for us. Maybe Rhonda.
Right. This is going to change in the very near future, but each airline had their own way of randomly selecting a passenger to be screened more. Certain airlines would automatically pull someone out who bought a ticket at the very last minute. They would automatically pull someone into a random search if they bought a one-way ticket. And some airlines would automatically pull somebody out for a random review if they paid by cash. Now, and then certain airlines also would randomly select individuals who obviously were not a threat, like an older person in a wheelchair or something, because like Priscilla had learned, it was because they wanted to make sure that if there was a terrorist in the room, that they would be acting as if they would search anyone, and that they don't want racial profiling to come into play. So they're pulling people out even if there's no way that this person could potentially be a terrorist or something.
But I think you were getting at this too, Priscilla, that if they never were going to search anyone in a wheelchair, that a terrorist might use a wheelchair saying, I won't get searched.
They don't want to set a pattern. So if there's a segment of the population that they're not searching at all, that would set precedents. That would be a perfect person to choose to be for a terrorist activity, which is what they're trying to do. That's why you'll see people that you're going, why are they searching that grandmother, or why are they searching that child? And that's why.
Okay. Janelle Burke.
I have some questions, just a short series of questions, and all three of you can feel free to jump in here. The first one is, if you had something that you did need to take aboard the airline, or what would you suggest? You know it's something that's sensitive, and so, but you still need to transport it. What would you suggest? Do you call your travel agent? Do you call the airline? What do you do?
A lot of it's going to depend on what the item is. If it's one of the items on the forbidden list, then you're not going to be able to transport it via the aircraft. You're going to need to figure out a different way to get it there, such as shipping it via mail or something like that. Now, if it's something that might be questions, then what you're going to want to do, particularly if it's in your carry-on luggage, you're going to want to make sure you allow for extra time so that you can, because you're probably going to be pulled aside. And when they pull you aside, if there's an item that's questionable, they'll chat with you about it, and if it's going to be kind of up to them whether or not it's allowed through. But generally there is a list, and it's on the FAA website for a complete list.
Do you have the FAA website, by the way, or should we just try www.faa?
Yes. And it's under government, I believe it's faa.gov, but I need to double check. But I think if you just go into one of the search engines and look for the FAA, you'll find it.
So there is a list of things
Yes,
that you
there
can't
is.
take. And if you had a question, you might want to check before you go to the airport so that you don't get there and find yourself
That's right.
involved.
And the FAA is going to be the final authority on that.
What about some things not to do while you're at the airport? In other words, I think we all know don't yell fire in a crowded room, but what are some things maybe not to do that would keep you from getting into some trouble?
I think packing your carry-on with a lot of metal items, you'd automatically be asked to be pulled aside, and they're going to go through it and unpack, which is going to cause a time delay, and it causes an irritation. And if you're connecting through 3 or 4 different airports, and it's happening every single time, and that's what they do. They pull people out who have packed in their luggage, even if it's a wallet or something with a metal casing. So I would try to eliminate anything like that. I would try to eliminate overpacking, but I know that overpacking in your carry-on, but I understand that a lot of people these days, they're not wanting to check luggage anymore, so they are overpacking. But the more packed it is, the longer it's going to take to go through. And if you try to take more than one carry-on, they're going to absolutely deny it, because now you're only allowed, one carry-on and a purse, or one carry-on and a laptop, or one carry-on and a camera bag. So if you show up then with also a garment bag, you're sent back, which just causes, a delay.
And how about some things not to say?
Well, of course you don't want to make any comments at all about bombs or threats or anything like that, even in joking, because they are listening to that. And I have seen people pulled out of line for, complaining because it's taking so long, and so they make some comment like that, and then they're really in for a long time. You also probably want to make sure when you're packing your stuff that the items that you're going to have to take out, such as if you're traveling with a laptop and you have it in your briefcase, that you've got it to where you can get to it easily, because you are going to be required to pull it out and have it go through the scanner separately.
And Lindsay, how about some things?
I would say
you can
it's
think
easy
of?
to do. Never leave your baggage unattended, or it's quite easy if you just wanted to go and get a drink at the fountain and you're sitting beside a stranger and you say, could you just watch my bag just for a moment? I would say not to do that. Never leave anything unattended.
What about some clothing to wear? You're going to travel now, and you're going to travel. What about some clothing that you should or should not wear? I'm thinking now of the big belt buckle. Probably it's a good time to leave the big belt buckle in your checked luggage, right? And maybe not wear that.
Anything with very much metal on it. The scanners are a lot more sensitive than they have been in the past, and so a lot of things are going to be setting it off that may not have in the past. So those are some of the really important things to remember. Also, shoes-wise, anything with a large sole on it, they're pulling people aside and having their shoes taken off, and what they'll do is they'll take your shoes from you and run them through the x-ray machine separately.
And I know that walking through the metal detector very carefully and not touching the sides is important. Is that correct? Because if you touch the sides, it's going to beep and call attention to you.
They'll pull you aside for a wand search then, usually.
And it's not just, I want to make sure that people understand it's not just terrorists, but there are other people who there are other problems sometimes in airports, such as theft, that can occur. And so it's important to be able to pass through the metal detector easily and without any kind of complications regarding your purse or whatever you're carrying with you.
You do want to keep a real close eye on your stuff, and what will end up happening is if they have to send stuff through the detector machine several times, you can be quite a distance from your luggage before you can finally walk through, or you may have walked through and your luggage hasn't gone through. So it's really important to pay attention to what all you're putting through there and making sure you get everything back.
When my husband and I travel together, one of us goes through first and then the other one goes through later for that very purpose, so that we can pick up, someone will be there to pick up the items that go through the on the conveyor belt through the process.
Also, I've heard from news accounts, there are a couple of other things. I want to talk about a couple more, and then we're going to talk about the increased responsibility of passengers actually during the flight. Sometimes, and this happened at Spokane International Airport, where it was very innocent, but it created a real serious problem. I think it was an older lady that had come to the airport to pick up her daughter, and she didn't read the signs properly, and she went through the wrong avenue and route and got through without being run through the detective system, and so they had to shut down the airport and move everybody out. So what advice do you have for people that are not familiar with an airport and they're there innocently to pick up someone, but they go through the wrong way? That happened also in Los Angeles at the airport too, where a man went through, he was in a hurry trying to find somebody, he went through the wrong way. I want you to comment on that. Maybe Lindsay, you could do that.
I can answer that. I think it's just now traveling, especially the frequent travelers, take a real active role in mentoring those people around you. I mean, I tend to do that all the time, even though, I'm not with the airline, but I am in the travel industry, and I mean, I'll be walking down a hallway and see somebody, they're looking for something, and you just walk up to them and help them, because ultimately we're all going to be affected. I mean, if we happen to see somebody going in the wrong direction, grab them and send them the right way, because ultimately it's going to be our time that's affected.
It can cause real delays.
And I would say that I do a fair amount of traveling. I think I'm on the road about every 2 weeks or so, and I think I see frequent travelers now mentoring those that are not well traveled. I think they are taking an active role in that.
Life has changed for all of us now. You're in the flight, and hopefully everything goes very, very smooth and all the passengers are well behaved. But suppose there are some unusual things happening or something of concern to you. What are you hearing from airlines and others? What can passengers do to assist the flight attendants and the flight crew? That was such tremendous heroes, those individuals that in Pennsylvania that prevented that plane from, it's on its way to Washington, D.C., obviously, to crash somewhere in Washington, D.C., and those passengers that were heroes to stop the plane. Speak to that issue about how we can help with the safety on the planes.
I think, again, people are just being very aware as to who is getting on their aircraft. People are being very aware as far as who's in the waiting room to get on their airplane. I was on one aircraft, and I was the third person who brought to the attention of a steward of someone who was acting very suspicious, and we had just boarded. So again, and she welcomed the input. She was just like, "Yes, thank you very much for notifying me. I already had 2 other people pointed out, and we'll keep an eye on him." And it was like, wow, that didn't happen pre-911. Everybody would have felt badly as far as turning someone in, someone's behavior, but now everybody's taking a very active role.
That's very, very helpful. On a flight to the East Coast recently to give a speech, I was on the plane when it was, we'd been on a long flight, and it was on its way to land. It was starting to descend, and a passenger, and I'm sure they were just ignorant of the process. Anyway, the instruction came on to be seated and to fasten your seatbelt, and this person got up. The flight attendant came up, real interesting observation, and she was very direct, which I appreciate. She said, "You will sit down, and you'll sit down this moment." It wasn't please, and And the people around, they were really appreciating that. You could tell that she was in charge.
Right.
And so you're seeing some behavior change with the great responsibility of flight attendants.
Tony, what airport were you flying into?
I was flying into Atlanta. That's another question I have, and then we'll soon be finishing with the safety issues, and we have other things that you're very much experts in that we can do that are probably more pleasant to discuss than the safety question. But let's talk about, already Lindsay's discussed, and thank you for going and interviewing before the show some security people at Spokane International Airport, but our airport is smaller, and fortunately we think at least that tends to be more safe than some of the large airports in New York or Chicago or Atlanta. Are you receiving information back that security, and there's just more people flying in and out involved, that the procedures may be different in a smaller airport than the larger ones?
Actually, they want to make the security procedures universal throughout.
Okay.
And surprisingly enough, Spokane, although you would think it's one of the smaller airports, it's actually been equipped before other airports with the most sophisticated machinery. In fact, at the end of December, they're going to implement these huge new screeners so that every piece of baggage that goes on the actual aircraft will pass through this screener. It's an enormous piece of equipment, about the size of a big SVU, and it will go through, similar to an MRI, where it will absolutely scan and detect any explosives or anything. And this is what they hope to implement by the end of December.
I need to tell our viewers that we're taping this program in October, and it'll be a little past December when it airs, so thank you for doing that, though. That's very, very helpful. Did they indicate why an airport the size of Spokane would be one of the first ones to implement all of these things rather than some of the larger? Is it maybe it's because it's less expensive, you need less equipment than you would, let's say, Chicago?
I think their performance of the airport, they are required to submit certain reports, and I think that Spokane Airport has implemented so far what was expected from them. They've met deadlines, and so that's one of the reasons that they were given priority. We should commend them for being so Absolutely.
efficient. Praise that particular staff. Is there anything else that you would like to give advice on safety before we move off of this subject?
I'd just like to comment and add more to what Lindsay just said. I don't know whether the viewers are aware, but the luggage that goes in the hold, checked luggage, has never been searched. So this is huge. I mean, this now means all checked luggage will be searched, which we haven't had that. We haven't had the ability to do that. So.
And that's one thing that will be different. If you happen to find a note in your bag, when they open your luggage to search it, the FAA will be leaving a note saying that it has been opened and searched by the FAA.
Well, that's thoughtful, though, to have that.
Well, that way, when you look and you realize it's been disturbed, at least you know why.
Yes, I think that's a wise policy, and they're to be commended, I think, for leaving the note. Janelle Burke.
Well, can I ask one more question on
Surely,
the issue
surely.
of safety, and that is children's travel. We have a lot of people now who their children are traveling, and they're fairly young, and they're going alone. What kinds of procedures are there for safety of children traveling in the skies?
Actually, they did make some changes for, now are you talking about unattended minors?
Yes, unattended minors.
Okay, they have made some real drastic changes recently in connecting flights, that you're not allowed to do certain flights, and certain airlines that if it's not a direct flight, you cannot put that child on the plane. There's a lot more rules and a lot of things that, and it's varying still a little bit by the airline, but those are some of the things that I know for sure that they have changed.
I would take it that if you have questions, the best thing to do is call your travel agent or call your carrier and ask them directly before you get there, rather than waiting until you get there to find out that you've got a problem.
That's right. Because with all the security and everything, you've got enough other things to worry about at the airport without having to deal with those kinds of issues, and we'll always be happy to get those answers for you.
And curbside check-ins and travel, is that, I've never done a curbside check-in, I don't know why.
It's
but
wonderful. It's very fast and it's back, which is the good news, because it was stopped. It's wonderful. You pull up, you pull your bags out, and he checks them right away, and I think you tip, what would be an average tip? $2 to $3 per bag to him, and you go in and you go right up to your flight.
And again, time is just about up. It moves really fast, and you'll be back next week, and we can continue the discussion. But moving in kind of a transition between these two programs, I hear that the ticket that we've always had that we could give to the airlines at the airport are on their way out. The electronic confirmations are the future. I guess it's so much for security purposes, but also I guess it's going to be less expensive. Airlines are looking at that. Who wishes to address the electronic ticket?
In my opinion, it's a revenue source for the airlines. That's why they're mandating electronic tickets. Because when we first started managing travel a number of years ago, about 4 to 6%, if we're looking at a company who purchases a lot of air travel, 4 to 6% of their air travel purchases went unused. That's because either an employee had left a company or a trade show was canceled or something. With the advent of electronic tickets, that when they first were just recommending that you take it, that percentage went up, it doubled, let's say. Now that they're mandating it, it has probably quadrupled. So what that means is out of sight, out of mind. If you don't have anything in your hand and you don't have an actual ticket, people are forgetting that they have that asset floating around out there. And those monies are company assets. So if somebody, they're saying now it's as high as 26% of what they're spending. So that means, of course, if a company's spending $100,000 on air travel, which we have a number of companies in our area that do, that's $26,000 every year in company assets that is not being utilized, it's not being managed.
On that note, I think we have to bring the program to conclusion, but it is the bridge, and there are all kinds of issues that we want to talk about. One of those is that does anyone understand the scheduling of airlines and all of these special deals, and why is it cheaper if you stay over Saturday night? All those things that I know our viewers will want to hear about next week, and I learned from you in a luncheon that we had together, and we shall proceed with to address those next week. Thank you all three very much. Ladies and gentlemen, on this particular program we've been talking about mostly safety procedures at airports and on flights after that awful crime of September the 11th in the year 2001. I'd invite you to be with us again next week when we will discuss some of these other issues that are not safety questions, but could be helpful to you who fly or are anticipating fly that have not been flying in the past. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Last week our program was dealing with new safety procedures at our airports after the awful crime of September the 11th in 2001. And this week we have our same guest back, but to change the subject and to deal with the issues of some policy changes on purchase of tickets and use of those tickets and a number of other things that have changed that is not necessarily related to the safety question. And we're so fortunate to have all three of our guests back from last week. First of all is Rhonda Sand, who is the president of Travel Management Incorporated with headquarters in Post Falls, Idaho. And with her is our other two guests, Priscilla Reynolds, who is the project manager at the company, and Lindsay Prummers, who is coordinating international tours and trips for groups as well as fundraising groups. And we may ask you about how fundraising groups are doing this as not only enjoying going somewhere, but also it's a project that they can have for fundraising. Welcome to all three of you. We're pleased to have you back, and we'll ask Janelle Burke, our regular panelist, to commence the question for this week.
My first round of questions has to do with if I'm going to buy a ticket to go traveling, and I'm not talking now about business travel, although the same kinds of principles apply there. What are some of the things I need to watch and I need to be checking out? For example, what are the deadlines for my travel plans? Should I know 3 weeks ahead of time? Should I know 2 weeks ahead of time? What kind of a deadline should I kind of have mentally in my mind as to when I want to search for the ticket?
I think in order to get the best dollar value on an airline ticket, it's good to start checking about 6 months prior to departure, and either just go online or email someone at an agency like ourselves, and we actually keep an eye out for you. So because airfares change on a constant basis, what happened in the past, and of course things are changing, we could generally count on airfare wars hitting like every 45 to 60 days. The pattern has actually slowed. They're not coming in as fast, but if you allow a good 6 months, you're probably going to be guaranteed the very lowest air price on your air ticket.
But my goodness, I'm not a person who can ever plan 6 months ahead of time what I want to do. So what are some closer to time deadlines? Is it 2 weeks generally? The 14-day fare, is that kind of a cutoff period?
Well, I would say generally 21 days.
21 days, okay.
I mean, there are some 7-day advances and 14, but 21 is pretty much the maximum that's required. But even if you have 21 days, for example, if there's a particular date that's popular, even if you give 21 days,
yes,
it doesn't absolutely ensure that you're going to get the best price, but that is general rule.
The weekend before Christmas, for example, is not going to be the time you want to wait until 21 days before.
Then I'm not sure 6 months is going to do it.
And so those are some deadlines that people might watch. What other kinds of places might people look? If they're senior citizens, might they look at senior citizen fares?
Well, the days of senior citizen fares at this point are almost gone with most airlines. They do have certain what they call senior discount packages that you can still purchase, and again, it's just depending on the airline, and it changes on a very regular basis, so it can get very confusing. What was in place a month ago is no longer in place today. So the best thing on any current trip is just to follow up with a travel professional and get some advice on how they should proceed on that particular trip.
You've been very gracious with your time, not only to do these two shows, but to meet with me before the program, and had all these questions I'd never asked, and I should have. It just puzzle me. And so one is, and I don't mean to be negative in my comment, but I have never understood, maybe it's my fault, the policies of airlines and all the different options and changes, and you did really bring light to some of my questions. And so my first one is, I've often wondered why if you can stay over Saturday night, your deal is much better than if you cannot. So, and I know there's a reason for that. And Rhonda, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. I think again it's revenue to the airline. They're in business to make money. Their bread and butter is the businessman, is the business traveler, and if they can fine-tune the rules enough to eliminate the business traveler from being able to use the lowest fare, they're going to make more money on their airline tickets. For example, right now from Spokane to New York, a last-minute non-Saturday night stay for the poor corporate traveler who finds out he has to go to New York on Monday is $2,500. And if he were able to stay a Saturday night and plan 7 days in advance, that comes all the way down to $500. But a business traveler never plans, 21 days in advance and stays a Saturday night. But in the event he was ever able to do that, well, then of course it brings it down to $298, which is the airfare that everybody ideally would like to have. So there again, it's a matter of maximizing their revenues, and most of them do come from the business traveler.
But in our conversation we had, and Priscilla, maybe you take this part, an awful lot of corporations choose not to have their official stay over. If the conference ends on Friday afternoon, they want them to come back Friday instead of staying until Sunday. And so then, they don't get as good a deal. But we who are going for other reasons can. Why do corporations do that and then pay a larger sum of money?
Well, generally, if you stay over the Saturday night, you get the break on the airfare, but there's some other costs if you're on company business that are associated with staying over on the Saturday night, such as the hotel room, rental car, meals for the employee, because if the company is requiring them to stay over, there is the loss of their time, too. Another issue that comes up with companies, too, is the company liability issue, because if they require the employee to stay over on the Saturday night and that employee is still considered working for the company, so they're on company time, and that it tends to bring some liability issues up in that if something happens, the company can be held liable.
Such as an accident.
Accident, right.
Mm-hmm. Or if someone's out partying and
exactly,
and the conference is over and then they drive when they shouldn't. And
that's right, and then the company, they can in turn turn around and sue the company because they are on company time. So that brings some new issues to light where that may serve as a savings, but it may not really be
in the future. But for one who's traveling on their own, not for a company, like if I travel, then it pays to stay over Saturday night if one can, and secondly, a company's not liable for whatever
exactly.
Might happen. Right. Something that is really changed dramatically, and that has to do with from the past when you had to change your schedule and your flight. And we mentioned this briefly last time, somewhat in relation to the electronic ticket, but it used to be very reasonable that emergencies arise and you change for different reasons, illness or whatever, and you could have a change in your ticket. Of course, you pay us a reasonable price, maybe $50, whatever. That has all changed now, not only how much you have to pay for changing the ticket, but even the ticket itself may change drastically. Would you be more explicit than I in explaining to our viewers what happens with this new policy?
With the new policy on a non-refundable ticket,
right.
In the past, if you'd find a week or so before that you were unable to take the trip, you could just not take your trip and then apply that ticket later on 2 or 3 months down the road, pay a penalty, mind you.
A very reasonable one.
Well, yes, I mean the penalties keep increasing, but at least you could pay a penalty and put the residual funds towards another ticket. Well, now the policy has changed so that if you don't actually exchange the ticket prior to your departure date, then the ticket is of no use at all.
Okay. And Rhonda, you were talking before we started this program on that too, and that is if you'd bought a really inexpensive ticket and then you had to change, not only do you have the fee, but you may have to pay for a much higher price for the...
Right. If you were one of the lucky people who got the round-trip airline ticket to New York for $298, and then you were supposed to be traveling the next day and you found that you couldn't go, before the flight takes off, you must change that airline ticket, pay the $100 penalty, and then change your dates. But then you're paying the prevailing rate of the airline ticket on that day. So the $298 fare war might be gone, and the new fare of the day is $598. So then you're going to have to pay the difference between $298 and $598. And on top of that, $100 change fee.
So you're talking about $400 more.
So then you're talking about $400 more for where you already had $298 invested. So I think a lot of people then are seriously going to consider the value of taking that trip.
Right. That's very helpful. Thank you, Janelle Burke.
Probably what this means is that people ought to give good thought to where they're going to travel and when they're going to travel. But that has always been true. Probably people need to be careful about their arrangements in advance. Many people have traveled, of course, abroad, and right now there are still a good number of people who are traveling abroad. What do you find in that area, Lindsay? Are you still planning a lot of group trips to other countries?
Absolutely, yes. I have noticed there is a trend towards people choosing perhaps the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, maybe over the Mediterranean or Europe. But people are still travelling, yes, most definitely.
And there are some good trips to be taken there. What kinds of things might pique people's imagination? What kinds of things might people be thinking about that would be really fun to do?
Well, I've noticed that there seems to be a trend towards barging. That's taken a small moving barge on the River Seine in France. That's been popular this year. Themed vacations, like bicycling, when somebody's had a particular sport in mind. I've noticed quite a lot of families are taking these bicycle trips in France, and a lot of fishing or scuba diving seems to be more popular this year too. So I would have to say people are being more active when they're going on vacation now.
What about a family that wants to go and they want to use this time to get away, and they're away from the telephones and all other kinds of things, and they're thinking this would be a great time for a family, and we have a number of friends, including ourselves, who want to go somewhere with their adult children and perhaps grandchildren to be away from home. What kinds of things are you seeing along that
Well, you know,
line?
one of my all-time favorites is cruising. And that's a great thing to take the whole family. You can do a family reunion, you can take the children, and there's all kinds of activities. There are children's programs that are specially designed for the kids to keep them entertained. There are also other places if you just want to go one place and stay. There are certain resorts that cater exclusively to families and children.
And are those reasonable prices that you can get these vacations for?
A lot of that all depends on the shopping and having somebody do a lot of legwork for you as far as doing the looking, and that's why you want to use a travel professional that knows that kind of stuff, because they're going to know what the deals are. And there's also certain times of the year traveling, different times of the year too. Obviously, if you go when everybody's out of school, the prices are going to be a little bit higher for the family things. But if you can go during an off time, the prices go down.
For example, you go to Florida in the summertime when tourists are not so much there.
Actually,
and burn up.
Actually, summer is one of the big peak times for Florida too, because of Disney World being down there and stuff, and that's when
changed
families are able to go. So
then let's say you go to Arizona in the middle of summer,
there you go.
July or August. So sometimes if you don't have money, you don't pick the peak season to go. What to ask Lindsay about fundraising groups, nonprofits, and they want to do a trip. Maybe they want to go, if they're a human rights group, to somewhere where there's been a real history of human rights, but at the same time they want to, for their organization, they want to have some profit from this. You deal with those kind of things too?
Yes, this is exactly what I deal with, yes. The travel professionals at TMI are a seasoned group of travel agents. We've all been in the agency in the travel industry about 20 years. And so what we're able to do is formulate an itinerary that's custom built, particularly for that organisation. And at the same time, we negotiate directly with the airlines, directly with the ground operators. And so we're basically cutting the middleman out. We're not using a tour operator to put this together. We're doing, the legwork ourselves. So there's costs that are saved, and these costs we can pass on to the charitable organisation in the form of a donation per person for their charity. So that's how, and so together with the organisation, we form the itinerary, we mark it, we take a group from the organisation to their destination, and for each person that attends, they're given a nice donation.
And then someone from your organization goes with them that's familiar with the itinerary, or?
Yes.
In other words, the charitable group, maybe it's officers and members of the organization, they want to go, but they're not experts on where you're going, so they need that. I guess kind of a tour guide.
Yeah, I mean, for example, one of the tours that I lead is a Castles and Gardens tour in England, and so obviously
from your accent, I believe you're familiar with England. Would that be right? You're from Oxford,
correct.
I believe.
I'm from Oxford, England.
You have a beautiful use of the English language.
Oh, thank you. But most of the hotels and the restaurants that we eat at I've personally handpicked those. And that's not something that a general tour operator can do. They're favourites of mine. We go shopping for antiques in one of my favourite areas. And then I actually employ a horticulturist because I'm not actually a master gardener. So where I'm deficit in some areas, I employ a professional just to answer people's questions. But for the most part, I lead the tour.
I want to be careful that I don't start identifying too many airlines and all, but I will do one, because if they can do it on NBC, CBS, and ABC, surely we can. I saw an interview the other day with the president of a fairly new airlines, and they're extremely prosperous. We've heard a lot about Southwest has been making money, but JetBlue seems to be the the new kid on the block that's doing really well. And the president, he goes on flights, I believe, once or twice a week, and he passes out the peanuts, or he helps put luggage on. And I guess he's purchased all same type of an airplane, all new, and you have television with all different kind of stations and all, and he's making money, and yet he's doing it at a lower rate. Based on that introduction, and I have no connection with JetBlue, but is that going to affect all the airlines and what they do in the future? His comment was that many airlines have forgotten that the passengers are the customers that keep you in the air, and that he felt that sometimes that is forgotten. So since you work with all the different airlines and all, is this kind of thing going to impact the future?
Oh, I think it already has. I think the airlines are the other airlines are definitely feeling the crunch because, as you commented, JetBlue is profitable, Southwest is profitable, and they do business in a different way. When you go and look on their sites, or when you're not dealing with 50 different types of fares, they've really cut down on the number of fares, and it's really based on advance purchase and different
they just
things
have one
like
fare for.
Right. And so, yes, I think it's going to greatly impact how they're doing business, particularly now that the other airlines are in so much trouble.
They also indicated that one of his creative devices, of course, is New Airlines, that he bought all new planes, the same type. So his mechanics and engineers and all, they don't have to deal with a lot of different types of planes. But down the road, when his planes are older, then of course there'll be some expenses he doesn't have now. But I did find that intriguing. Janelle Burke.
We talked a little bit before the show began about standbys, and let's explain first what a standby is, and then what some of the new policies may be with regard to standbys. Can you explain that, Rhonda?
Standby essentially is going to an airport and trying to get on a flight which you're not ticketed on, generally on the same airline. And I would say business travelers tend to use it the most. Let's say we have a businessman in Chicago, and he was thinking his meeting was going to last until 5, and he's scheduled on a 7 p.m. flight, but instead he gets out of his meeting at 11 in the morning, and there's a 2 o'clock flight. So the traveler's been trained to just go straight away to the airport and ask to stand by for that airplane. If there are seats available on the aircraft, it was always to the airline's benefit and to the traveler's benefit to go ahead and put him on that seat, because it's a perishable product. The plane is going to go out, and if it goes out empty, they're not going to earn revenue on it, and they could go ahead and turn around and sell their 7 p.m. seat for perhaps a higher amount. The recent change is that the airlines have found that they can probably earn more revenue by disallowing the traveler now to fly standby. If it's on the same day, they'll still allow it, but at a $100 change fee. And that is something that is very new. And again, this is not with all carriers. This is with United, Northwest, American, Delta, and US Air, not the JetBlues and the Southwest. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of disappointment from the traveler is, let's say he's in Chicago at this meeting and he gets done at 5 p.m. the day before. The travelers have been trained by the airlines for many years to just go ahead and go straight away to the airport a day before, check out of the hotel, walk up to the 7 p.m. flight one day before and ask to fly standby. What he's being told now is no. You have to buy a new one-way ticket to get home. Well, that's never in a company's budget to have that expense, because for the businessman, the price of the airline ticket is staggering. But now he's checked out of his hotel. He's turned in his rental car. He's standing at the airport, and so it's causing a lot of frustration.
But people need to just know about these things and make them a part of their plans. Is that correct?
Exactly. So right now we're going through a lot of education, emailing our clients and just making sure that they remember that the change has taken effect. Because the traveler that's been on the road for 15, 20 years, he's well trained that he can just run to the airport and fly standby on any flight. So.
And something else that probably is good for people to remember who might be viewing is that a lot of policies will probably be changing on a regular basis, that the travel industry right now is fairly fluid, and that there will be some changes that will take place. And also, if you have a question about the specific ticket that you're buying, you should probably clear that with your travel professional or with the airline, the carrier that you're going to be using, so that you know what the rules are with regard to your particular carrier.
There's a
Is that
lot
correct?
of fine print, and that's really important, is to look at all of that, and particularly if you're purchasing anything off the internet, make sure you read those rules, because some of the stuff is buried in there. So if you don't read all of that stuff, you're going to miss something important.
Another thing that might be wise for people to do is make sure that they understand what the bottom line cost is for a ticket, because there are so many add-ons, and particularly at certain airports. And this is true not just with the airline ticket, but it's true with your car rental. It's true with your hotel. There are certain areas where there are additional taxes that can be significant and add greatly to the cost of your ticket. So what you want to ask for is the bottom line, is that correct?
That's right.
Absolutely. We just had a situation this week where there's a fantastic fare war. It will probably be over by the time this airs, but out of the Spokane or Seattle airports, round trip to Los Angeles, $100. But when we sent out the notice to our customers to buy it, we said, yes, it's $100, but don't forget it's going to double in price just with the amount of taxes, because we have the airport taxes, we have the excise tax, we have the security tax, and the fuel surcharge. I mean, I believe it comes to about $65 or something on a $100 airline ticket.
Now, we've talked a lot about the airlines, but let's talk a little bit about rental cars. In some situations, we've found recently that our rental car was as expensive as the ticket, the airline ticket. And so what are some of the things you can do to make sure that when you're renting that car, it's the car you want, it's the vehicle you want, and it's at the best price you can manage to get it for?
You want to be sure and do a lot of shopping, and you want to make sure when you're doing your shopping that you are comparing like to like, that you're not just the quoted rate on the rental car, but all of the airport surcharges, the fuel surcharges, and anything else. You also need to take in consideration if you're purchasing insurance on the rental car. That's not necessary for a lot of people. A lot of people's own insurance policies on their cars will cover that. And that's something you should check before you leave to see if that's the type of insurance, if you need any insurance. So those are things that I would say people really need to be careful, because one company might quote a really great rate, but it doesn't include all of those charges.
And one company might charge a great rate for a particular model of car. Another company calls it a different size and charges a different rate. So you have to compare the same kind of car, I would take it, as well.
Yes, and how many doors the car has, if it's a 2-door versus a 4-door. So those are all really important issues, and they're things the consumer needs to keep in mind to make sure that they're really getting like comparisons.
I guess the best thing to do is hitchhike.
No,
that's not very safe, is it?
The best thing to do is let a professional do it for you.
That was my next question. What are the advantages of having an agent to take care of all these? We certainly know that in international travel, with what Lindsay's told us about, to a package like that, you just really have to have that. But more and more people are looking at getting on the computer, and they do their own scheduling and electronic tickets. But in doing that, what advantages do they have or do not have compared with all these things that we've just been talking about?
Well, of the things that we've been talking about, when you're doing it yourself, you may do, a couple trips a year, and if it's just a simple round trip ticket from, Spokane to Seattle, you can probably do that all right. But this is something that you only do once or twice a year. It's just like any other professional that you utilize. A professional travel agent is someone that does this all of the time for a lot of different people. They're aware of all these rule changes, as we've just talked about, how quickly things change. They're aware of the things that are going on in the industry. They're also aware of all of the price wars and all of the things, all of you benefit from all of the other people that they've helped experience. So that's one reason why a professional can help you do this better, because they have all that experience.
And if you don't know about all these changes, what Ron said earlier, you may have a $298 ticket and you wind up paying $400 more, and you really are an unhappy camper with $698 because you did some things that you didn't think about. Or I assume sometimes people just don't even check in until it's too late. The plane's gone, and then they find out this change is just really dramatic. If they don't travel often, they'd be less likely.
That's right. And that is happening.
I am really thankful that we are increasing safety, and I'm glad that the government of the United States has taken over the personnel for as you talked about that earlier, Lindsay. But there's cost to all of that. Of course, it's going to cost the government of the United States lots of money. It is better paying jobs, and it has fringe benefits, which the workers deserve that kind of recognition. But to help pay part of that, are we not also increasing a particular tax to help with that? Is that correct? A minute ago we talked about the different taxes and
Right. It depends on the airport, of course. I'm going to speak on the Spokane airport because it's what I'm most familiar with. Every passenger that departs Spokane pays a surcharge on their airline ticket of $3. So the airport is getting revenue of about $14,000 every month to subsidize some of these changes and the upgrades to the airport.
But that money doesn't go to the federal government.
No, that's going to just Spokane International for their increases. And I don't know whether or not Lindsay pointed out, well, it was in the last session actually, that the upgrade to the system in Spokane for security actually is going to cost $9 million.
On that note, I have to bring the program conclusion. We just didn't get to do everything we wanted to, but thank you. It's been most informative both weeks, and we thank you for being here last week and again this week to talk about two issues. One, safety in flying, and number two is how to understand all the policies that one might need to get their ticket to fly. Thank you again for your time, both today and when we met earlier to prepare for these programs. Good luck in all that you do. Ladies and gentlemen, with this program we bring to a conclusion a 2-week series on flying, and I hope it's been helpful to you as you look forward to flying in the future. And I'd like to invite you to do this again next week at the same time. We will move to yet another subject. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.